Welcome back to It's a Numbers Game. I'm Adam Morris, and my co-host, who is running the episode today, is Daniel Welling. Now, last time we had Adam Pilton on the show, we touched on tabletop exercises right at the end of the conversation, so we knew straight away we had to bring him back to do this subject justice. Adam is a cybersecurity advisor and speaker at Heimdal Security. His career spans 15 years in law enforcement, finishing up as a detective sergeant leading cybercrime and covert operations. He's spoken at CompTIA, ISE Europe, the Managed Services Summit, and has been cited as a cybersecurity expert in Forbes and the national press. Today, we are going to deep dive on tabletop exercises, what they actually are, what best practice looks like, how MSPs can use them as a real tool with their clients, and why the businesses that do them are in a fundamentally better position when the worst happens. So let's get into it.
Adam, welcome back to the podcast.
Hello, glad to be here.
So we maybe 3 months ago, subject to when we actually recorded this and when we recorded the first episode, let's call it 3 months, we wanted to go straight to a second episode because we ended the last one talking about tabletop exercises. And in my mind, what I had envisaged for this episode is almost like a masterclass on the topic and establish the standard definition of what exactly is a tabletop exercise, what does best practice look like, and how should MSPs be using this as a tool, a tactic, a strategy in helping their clients. So, Adam, over to you. Maybe tell us what it actually is.
So a tabletop exercise is essentially an opportunity for an organization to get their senior leadership team, anyone that would be involved in a genuine cyber attack or a breach. And it's an opportunity to get all of them together and essentially rehearse the scenario. So it could be any type of cyber attack, but what you're doing is you're running through a set of events that are given to you over stages. And you should be using your instant response procedure to go through it and say, look, this is how we'd respond at this moment. And the person that is leading, facilitating the tabletop exercise, they will introduce new pieces of information as you make decisions. So the ultimate aim of it really is to give leadership teams that feeling of confidence that they know how to respond. They know how to use their instant response procedure. They know who to communicate with, what to say at the relevant times, and ultimately get to a quick resolution for any instance that they do experience.
Okay. And it feels to me like there's immediately a bit of gamification, a bit of theatrical drama to be experienced here. Is that one of the ways to do it, or should this be deadly serious? And
yeah, you've got to toe the line between the two. So for sure, it's a gamification. There is an degree of fun to it because there is no consequence. Nobody's get hurt at the end of it. No one's going to have any impact on day-to-day business. So yeah, ultimately, it can be seen as a game. However, it's really important that whilst you're going through the exercise, it is taken seriously because you want to put your body through the stress. Those decisions that you're making, they must be defensible decisions. And because of that, you need to be thinking clearly and thinking rationally about what decisions would I actually make in this scenario. If it's treated entirely like a game with no consequence, then you're not going to get board members, senior leaders taking part and acting as they should. It is meant to be a degree of stress, albeit nobody should be keeling over during the event.
yes, indeed. Okay, so one of the common descriptions I hear of where these go wrong is really where you started. So you got your instant response plan. So we're now in a live scenario. Let's see what we should do first. And where is the plan stored? Oh, it's on my laptop, which I don't have access to. Is that a real thing? Does that really happen?
It does, unfortunately. And you've got the equation of either it's on my laptop, it's printed out somewhere, or even I don't know where it is, or maybe a worse scenario, is everyone's got a different version because it's been updated over the years and they saved the first version they came across and never looked at it again. So yeah, this is a big problem. And in part, this is what tabletop exercises are all about. It's about getting the mistakes, it's flushing them out of the system before you actually need to seriously deal with this stuff. So it's about, finding out that, do you know what? Version 5 is the version that we're on and that everyone should have. And this is the Bible. And it's also about making sure that when people are given certain responsibilities or asking certain things, they know exactly where they stand, what their responsibilities are, who they should be speaking to. Because we hear it so often, don't we, that at the moment of attack, the CISO is out of the country on holiday or committed at an event all day, uncontactable. And because of that, what often happens is things fall over because then they default to the person that might know the most about tech in the room. And that's because they've got the latest iPhone, maybe, like some ridiculous reason. So yeah, exactly what it's all about. It's about getting those mistakes out of the system and making people realize, actually, I need to step up. If you've seen the leadership, I need to step up and take some accountability here for what's going on.
Okay. And in the scenario I've just described, it immediately falls down at the first hurdle. Is there like a timeout, a reset, and we say, okay, problem 1 is we need version 5 of the plan, and then you restart again and keep doing that until you get to a conclusion?
Yeah, so the facilitator, the person that's essentially feeding the information, they'll make the calls on the day. I mean, I would suggest personally that you probably want to have version 5 in your back pocket and have an understanding of exactly what's going to happen. So when I've run tabletops before the actual day, before the event, I'll be speaking to that organization, different people that aren't involved in the actual tabletop. But for example, the security team, I'll be saying, look, what are the problems that you think is going to come up? What are you seeing as issues in your day to day? And they'll quite frequently say, oh, this department, I have no idea about this. Or the C-suite, for example, they don't even know where the incident response is. So you have to research and anticipate those problems, and then have the version 5 in your back pocket. So when it happens, we can go, okay, straight away, there's a lesson learned. We don't know what the incident response procedure is, but here you go. Here's a copy. Now, based on that, because ultimately that's what's going to happen in real life, someone would eventually find a copy and then they'd start working off it. So personally, I'd give them a copy pretty early on just so they can practice using it in that tabletop exercise.
Okay. And therefore, this process actually starts before the day itself, insofar as either you'd have, as the facilitator, you'd have reviewed or even created for the business an incident response plan, and this is therefore a test run of that. Is that right? Or is this normally almost like a discovery process to say, let's assume no prep at all?
One of the most common conversations I have with MSP owners goes like this. We're busy, clients are happy, but the numbers never quite look how I think they should. And almost every time it comes back to the same thing. Not effort, not demand, but how the business is being valued and priced. And if I'm honest, it often runs a bit deeper than that. A lot of owners quietly undervalue what they do. They don't fully recognize the weight of responsibility, the experience they've built, or the impact they have on their clients' businesses. So pricing ends up lower than it should be, not by a design, but by a belief. It's incredibly common. We see it all the time. And it's something we help MSP owners work through in a structured, practical way, so the numbers start to reflect the true value of what they deliver. If any of this resonates, it's worth having a conversation. So just head over to mspfinanceteam.com and book a slot in my diary, or email me at adam@mspfinanceteam.com.
Certainly, and it really is up to the organization doing it and the facilitator. So you get the National Cybersecurity Center, got their exercise in a box. So you can just download it and run with those. And GTIA as well, they've got their own tabletop exercises to build customer resilience and preparedness. It's almost like I'm reading that from the pamphlet in front of me right now, isn't it?
I'm sure you're not. I'm sure you're not.
But yeah, GTIA have got a booklet as well, which gives you some pre-written tabletop exercises and when to implement the next feed of information. So you could go down that route and work off a ready-made one, so to speak. But equally, like I described, is what I prefer to do, and if the organization is supportive of that, because obviously it's additional work, is to speak to the organization, understand the systems they're using, the problems they're having, understand their instant response procedure. Quite often, by reading someone else's instant response procedure for the first time, you can pick out all the problems, the faults, because you see them. And I know the ones that I've written myself, you spend hours writing them. And because you've read it over and over again, as you've made these iterations to perfect it, you then become blind to some of the things that are obvious errors. So a fresh pair of eyes is a good thing. And that's exactly why I'd recommend doing the preparation beforehand, the facilitator, doing the preparation beforehand to get that insight, that information, so they can really tailor it down. Because then it also puts a little bit of extra emphasis and a realization on the scene leaders when they come to do this tabletop exercise, and the idea of the system that they know and love and trust and generates income for them. When that goes down, it feels a little bit more real, doesn't it? Rather than the generic outlook is off or whatever it may be.
Yeah. And I guess just thinking through this from a size of organization perspective, this is different if you've a corporate or enterprise size business to if you've an SME business. In the corporate enterprise, you literally have a number of people around the table working it in the same way you do an SME, but they're perhaps not directly involved in the details. Or how would they differ, I guess?
Yeah, so I'd say the smaller businesses are going to be probably leaning more into the exercise in a box style or the GTIA style examples, because that really it's a smaller group of people more likely, and it's more about experience in those decisions and not playing the game, but going through it and understanding. And that smaller team is going to be less niched down. So it's not necessary. You're not going to have a head of communications. You're not going to have a HR team. You're not going to have a CTO, potentially a CEO, and all these different departments, which you'd get in a bigger enterprise organization, all with their different responsibilities and functions and many people under them. But the smaller teams, yeah, there's still going to be potentially different departments there. However, they're not as niche down as the enterprise. So I would suggest that looking at the scale, your enterprises are more likely to have a tailored tabletop exercise, whereas the smaller the businesses, the more likely you're going to use something like a pre-made tabletop exercise.
And assuming, and there's probably two questions here, assuming that the MSP is facilitating this, does the MSP also have a seat at the table as the MSP for the organization?
Yeah, and I think that's a really valuable piece of the puzzle there. So yes, I would say 100%. And I would say as well, if the MSP is facilitating it, the person that's sat at the table as the MSP in the exercise should have no idea about what is going to happen next. Because when you've got that element of surprise or that element of not knowing what's going to happen next, that's real life, isn't it? That's exactly what's going to happen. You don't want someone turning up and having all the answers pre-written down and looking great on the day, because when the actual breach happens, that isn't going to be the case. They're not going to have all the answers. So going back to the initial point, you want people to feel a bit uncomfortable because they're having to think on their feet and react and respond. And that's why it's a win-win for MSPs and businesses. So the business gets to experience that situation and interact with their MSP, and the MSP hopefully gets to demonstrate how effective they are in that situation. But equally for the MSP, they get the opportunity to think on their feet. How would I respond in this situation? And that's something that they not only can bring to the client they're serving on that day, but then to all clients. So it's a valuable educational lesson on both fronts there.
And I guess I'm then thinking about the independence of that process. And I'd see it as an opportunity and a risk for an MSP and a business. But would a sort of typical SME MSP be best inviting another MSP to run the exercise, and almost that like they partner up and they cross-check each other, maybe?
I mean, it's an option. I imagine it will probably cause a little bit of political tension between MSPs and how they're marking each other. I mean, I would suggest, again, depends on the organization you're dealing with, but if you've got either someone in the organization, the SME, that has a foothold and interest in IT and security, get them to step aside, maybe the IT manager, the IT lead for that company, get them to step aside and facilitate it, because they get the oversight themselves. Yeah. Equally, there's no reason why the MSP can't bring the founder, the owner, the CEO, or someone from their team that doesn't work with that SME, or not certainly on a day-to-day basis, get them to lead it. as long as there's some sort of segmentation there, then I think that will result in a successful tabletop.
Got it. Okay, yeah, and possibly way less complicated than my initial idea. So yeah, no, that's really good. And again, going back to the scenario where, like, what does success actually look like for an exercise? One that doesn't surface any learnings or improvements, perhaps. Yeah, maybe everything is just tickety-boo, but presumably one that does surface some things to fix and improve upon is actually a successful one rather than one that goes totally smoothly.
100%. Obviously, my background is in the police, and in the police, whether it be cybercrime or my time before cybercrime, you deal with incidents every single day. 999 calls. You never know what's going to happen. And I can tell you now, there was no incident I ever went to and went absolutely perfect. Got every little detail right. There was always something to learn from. Even if it was minor, it was something to learn from. And it could be just the drive in the car and the blue lights on the way there. Little things like that. However, every instant you'll learn from. So if you're coming away from a tabletop exercise and you're feeling like you haven't learned something, then there's two people to look at. Either the facilitator has potentially given too much information, or the person that hasn't learned anything hasn't engaged with the process. And I think more likely it's going to be the engagement, because that is a really difficult thing to get people on board with. Certainly because you're potentially looking at 4 hours, like a morning, 8 to 12, doing one of these. So it's a lot of time to ask people to take out their day. And if they're feeling uncomfortable, which quite often we see people do when it comes to technology and then cybersecurity, because it's not something that people like to admit that I don't know everything about technology, even though nobody does. But getting that engagement is absolutely critical to a successful day for both fronts in terms of delivery of the tabletop, but them taking away those lessons learned.
Okay. And whereabouts do we host this? Is it at the client's site or off-site?
Yeah, I'd always say at the client site, because you want to make it feel real and you want to make it feel comfortable to a degree. So it should be a familiar environment. So whenever or wherever an incident would be hosted in real life. So if you've got a boardroom, for example, and that's the most frequent space, that is exactly where it should be hosted, because you want to be feeling like you are in the middle of a genuine attack, not on a day out in a fancy hotel, for example, while speaking of pastries, because that's not the environment you're going to be experiencing when it comes real life.
Yeah, I mean, you can always go and get pastries afterwards if it's been a success. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, definitely pastries for breaks and lunch for sure.
Okay. And next question on this then would be how frequently these should take place.
Yeah, this is a really good question. So it's subjective, depending upon the size of your business and the maturity of your organization. So the default answer is at least every 12 months, so at least once a year. However, I'm very much, and coming from a cybersecurity background, not taking into, like, I'm not a CFO, for example, so I'm not thinking about budget here. And this is the big stumbling block of people's time, but I'd like to see them take place every quarter, because I think they add so much value. Lots of people don't realize what they don't realize. And yeah, we've got these cybersecurity, we've got the technical controls in place protecting us. But when we take a step back, and even taking a step back from tabletop exercises, and we start to think more strategically, the information that you get out of tabletop exercises, so whether it be the learning of we're not doing this, but even the understanding of, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about communicating to our staff as well as externally to all the key stakeholders, that then starts feeding into your strategies in terms of, right, okay, we need a communication template policy in place for how we're going to communicate with staff, what the channels are, what kind of information we're going to get across. That then starts building into your larger cybersecurity strategy and your long-term picture. So for me, that kind of information is invaluable. I get why it doesn't happen. As I say, it's a lot to ask of people to every quarter take 4 hours out of their day, and potentially as well, depending on who's doing it and how it's been done, it's potentially a lot of cost. So I do appreciate that, but I do think it's very important.
Okay. And I guess like all IT investments, there's, like you mentioned, about maturity of the business and ultimately then what they're what they're defending, what they're protecting as an asset, and therefore what financial ability they have to invest. And this is an issue that MSPs always are coming up against, B word. So what inventive ways have you seen MSPs approaching this? It feels to me like this would actually, given that there's a regularity to it, this would actually suit a recurring service model where you're paying a bit every month and having X number of exercises included over, whatever the period is. Is that how you see it being done?
Yeah, and I think that's the best way to be inventive about how you're going to deliver it. So, perfect world, we have a full tabletop exercise from chapter 1 to chapter 20. Yeah, the complete story. But if that's not going to work for time reasons, for budgetary reasons, then yeah, you need to start thinking creatively. So why not say, okay, we have a QBR. Every quarter we sit down and we talk about X, Y, and Z. Why not make an extra 30 minutes of that QBR, or even 30 minutes part of the current QBR, a focus on a certain section of your incident response procedure and just run a tiny little element of it. And it may not be everybody involved from that company. It may just be a few people, but it gets them thinking, it gets them talking, or even just looking at that section of the incident response procedure and just asking some questions. So this is the story, this is what happened. How do you think we would respond in that circumstance? What questions would you ask? Because for me, we're seeing more and more when it comes to cybersecurity, legislation, regulation, and it's pushing accountability. And it's pushing accountability to the top of the table. So no longer is it acceptable for boards, senior leaders to say, oh, I just did what the cybersecurity or the IT manager told me to do because they're the technical one and I've got no idea. That isn't acceptable. We now need to be in a position of defensible decision-making. And that means the people at the top need to understand the questions that need to be asked. And I don't mean at a technical level. I don't mean that at all. What I do mean, though, is that they need to be comfortable to ask questions. And it's questions that anybody could answer of their technical teams. And the technical teams have the responsibility to be able to explain it in a language that anyone can understand. So, I mean, I've produced 6 pillars, what I believe are the 6 pillars of effective incident response. And for me, I think they're a real good opportunity for businesses to think about what they're doing and then frame it into the larger, more strategic picture of what they need to be thinking, both before, during, and after a cyber incident.
And what are those 6 pillars? Wouldn't there any other question I could ask?
So the 6 pillars are governance and leadership, communication, partnership, preparedness and intelligence, operational agility, and then defend and protect. And say the whole point of them is so that in that moment, whether say before, during, or after, C-suite understand what they need to ask, and then in these tabletops, they identify these gaps so that they can learn, they can understand, they can ask the questions in a safe and a timely environment so that when that chaos arrives of an incident, a cybersecurity incident, they've got that understanding and they don't need to depend on their security teams or IT teams to make decisions for them.
Without going into all of them in detail, I'm sensing that there's a balance there across the entire commercial business, not just it being technical or leadership. As you said, there was an operational part to it. And presumably this is supportive of a wider, mature approach to IT and security generally. By having this process, you're effectively educating everyone within the business. So that ultimately will mean that they're going to be more aware and prioritize spending money on things that perhaps they wouldn't have been aware of or confident with historically. So it's almost like a double benefit.
Yeah, and exactly that. And I think it's really important. The pillars don't tell you the answer. So that's the whole kind of point in the pillars. It doesn't replace your instant response procedure. What they do is they give leaders, they give decision makers a compass ultimately. You look at each of the pillars, are you addressing that pillar? So communication is a really good example. communication is absolutely critical when it comes to incident response. We mentioned the internal communication to staff, but if we look outside as well to our clients, our partners, the wider supply chain, it's absolutely vital that we communicate, and we can't decide to make that communication during the moment. We need to be thinking about that communication ahead of time, so that when the moment does come, we're ready to communicate promptly. So it should be things like, what channels of communication are we going to use? Because quite often we see one channel has got all your hopes pinned on it, email, for example, and then during the attack, your email is inaccessible for whatever reason. Then all of a sudden, people are going, oh, how do we do it? Well, I think I've got so-and-so's telephone number. I'll send them a message, and it doesn't quite work. And one of the great case studies when it comes to communication was the MGM attack. So we saw that a few years ago, where Scattered Spider essentially took out the MGM casinos in Las Vegas and the hotel, caused absolute chaos because it went on for 10 days in total. And because of this, people start to worry about their holidays. Naturally, if you're going to somewhere like Las Vegas and the slot machines aren't working and people can't even access the hotel rooms and book food, then you're probably questioning, should I go on this holiday? But MGM are really good because they pre-prepared because they had a few things set up ready to go. They had a specific website that they made live, and they were putting information on there. And it wasn't information that was harming their response. It was informative. It was keeping people updated that, yeah, they're aware of the attack and this is what's happening right now. So people had some sort of information rather than leaving a void where people could speculate and rumor could circulate. They did issue public statements through multiple channels, as you'd expect. But the big win for me was they set up a dedicated call center as well. So for those people that, yeah, they read the updates potentially, but they wanted that little bit more personalized information to understand how it was going to impact them, they had that in place, that dedicated call center. And that's not something that you can sell all those things together. It's not something you can just set up in a couple of days, because if you think you're actually under attack at that moment and it's absolute chaos in the organization anyway. So things like that are a massive win.
So they definitely had tabletop exercises to prepare for that, and as you say, reduce the impact for them. And obviously a large organization, so, and one with significant value to protect. So you would absolutely expect that, but perhaps have a lesser expectation on an SME. But yeah, I really like actually your inclusion in the QBR of even a read through of a part of it, because one of the challenges that MSPs have, especially around the QBR TBR topic, they may not be quarterly, is the appetite for the client to actually sit, attend, and commit the time to that. So if there's an added value, then yeah, I think that can help sell the idea of the QBR rhythm as well. So, and of course it helps sell the concept of, well, perhaps you should be adding this line item for the annual tabletop exercise facilitation. So.
And you know, quite often I speak to lots of MSPs through my day job, and because of that, I hear the same thing. And there's MSPs, they have to offer different levels of service. So you've got cybersecurity, basics, satisfactory, and then premium, for example. And the majority of small businesses will go, well, I'll just get basic cybersecurity package, please, because all they want to do is be able to feel some degree of confidence in their cybersecurity. For the majority, and I'm speculating here, but for the majority, they say to themselves, yeah, I've got cybersecurity. I pay for that through my MSP. The reality is, of course, they've got a degree of cybersecurity, but when they understand what they're missing out on and why, it's not a case of scaring them into decision, but it's allowing them to make an informed decision. Because going back to the whole defensible decision point, let's say an attack has happened and it's gone terribly, and then you've got the lessons learned, the reflection, what happened. And the question is, why did you go for the basic package? Because that only included X, Y, and Z. And everything's always obvious in hindsight, isn't it? But in that moment in time, when the pressures on the individual making the decision was ultimately budget, then they made the decision that made sense in that moment in time. But once you start going through these reviews and having that greater understanding, that realization of, do you know what, that basic package, it doesn't actually protect us from X, Y, and Z. And we're seeing, because what our MSP is telling us, our quarterly business reviews, there's been a real rise in social engineering. So this is a weakness of vulnerability for us that for the price of X a month, we can not address, but essentially protect, put stronger defenses around, which actually makes a lot of sense. So it's a good way to have those conversations that MSPs need to have, businesses need to be engaged with, so they're making, say, defensible decisions that are fully informed.
Yeah, really, really good. Well, a really good place, I think, to conclude the masterclass on the tabletop exercise. I think anyone listening should have a really good sense now as to what's involved and how to go about making it happen, and encouraging their clients to come along with them as well. If anything that we haven't covered that you think we should add?
Oh, blimey, that's a good question. I think, to be fair, I think we've covered really the main message is you need to engage with these things. And I think we've covered that extensively. How it's delivered, how it's done is going to vary person from person. The cost of it, again, is going to vary, but there's no reason why you cannot use something like the National Cybersecurity Centre Exercise in a Box or the GTIA booklet, and even just have a crack at it yourself, even if you don't want to employ an extra person. But yeah, for sure, if you've got someone like an MSP who understands the tooling and the kind of information you're going to be talking about, you're going to get more value.
Yeah. Really, really interesting conversation. If anyone does have questions, how best to get hold of you?
Best bet is always LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the place to find me.
Very good. Thank you, Microsoft. The gift that keeps on giving. Yeah. Perhaps one of your communication channels in your incident response plan.
You know what? It'd probably be quite a wise one, wouldn't it? Really, LinkedIn. Most people are there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Great talking to you, and all the very best with getting the tabletop exercise message out there.
Lovely. Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate it.